Hello, and welcome to The Point of View, where we give our students a place to listen, learn, and lean in. We're your hosts, Zara, Aiden, and Olivia, and today we'll be talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, a land immensely rich in natural resources and diverse cultures, has long been trapped in cycles of conflict and exploitation. Its history has been shaped not only by internal struggles, but also by external forces that treated the region as a prize to be seized rather than a nation to be nurtured. The foundations of modern Congo's instability can be traced back to the brutal colonial rule of King Leopold II of Belgium. From the late 19th century until 1908, Leopold treated the Congo as his personal possession, extracting ivory and rubber through a system of forced labor. Millions of Congolese died under his regime due to starvation, disease, and mutilation for failing to meet quotas. Even after Belgium took direct control, the colonial system continued to strip the Congo of its resources, copper, cobalt, diamonds, and gold, while investing almost nothing into education, infrastructure, or governance. At independence in 1960, the country had only a handful of university graduates, no real administrative capacity, and borders drawn without regard to its ethnic and cultural diversity. This hollow state structure left the DRC vulnerable to coups, rebellions, and foreign interference. The assassination of Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba in 1961 symbolized the fragility of Congolese independence. Mobutu Sese Seko soon consolidated power, ruling as a dictator for more than 3 decades. Mobutu's regime thrived on Cold War patronage, siphonizing off state resources while suppressing dissent. By the 1990s, his collapse created a vacuum that was filled by rebel groups, many of them backed by neighboring states like Rwanda and Uganda. Groups such as the Rally for Congolese Democracy, RCD, the Movement for the Liberation of Congo, MLS, and various Mai Militas rose during the First and Second Congo Wars from 1996 to 2003. These groups, often extremist in their tactics, thrived on looting, ethnic scapegoating, and control of mining regions. Rather than fighting for ideological causes, many rebel factions used religion, ethnicity, or protection rhetoric as tools to justify violence and gain legitimacy. Their rise fragmented Congolese society further, turning the eastern provinces into battlefields where civilians bore the brunt of killings, mass rapes, and displacement. It was into this fractured regional environment that Joseph Kony and his Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, expanded. Born in northern Uganda in 1961, Kony presented himself as a prophet, claiming divine guidance, but his use of religion went far beyond rhetoric. He fused elements of Christianity, traditional Akoli beliefs, and apocalyptic prophecy to portray his war as a holy struggle. This is a part of a broader pattern seen in Africa during the late 20th and early 21st century, where religious extremism, often tied to charismatic leaders promising salvation or purification, spread in conditions of poverty, political neglect, and weak state presence. In regions like northern Uganda, South Sudan, and northeastern Congo, where communities felt abandoned by central governments and overlooked by international institutions, Kony's message found a captive audience, not because people embraced it voluntarily, but because his forces imposed terror, abduction, and indoctrination. The LRA's use of children as soldiers and sex slaves was not only a strategy of survival, but also a way to erase individual identities and rebuild loyalty around Kony's religious extremism. The United Nations and international actors, stretched thin across multiple crises in Africa, often neglected these remote areas. Peacekeeping forces were concentrated on larger conflicts in the DRC, such as those involving Rwanda and Congo's civil wars, while rural populations, terrorized by groups like the LRA, were left without consistent protection. This neglect allowed extremist groups to root themselves in the borderlands, exploiting gaps in security and governance. The violence that communities faced was not only from foreign insurgents like the LRA, but also from homegrown Congolese militas. Many of these militas were initially armed or tolerated by the state and regional governments as proxies during the Congo Wars. Some were given weapons to defend local communities against foreign-backed rebels, but without oversight, they became predatory forces themselves. Others seized opportunities to control mines, trade routes, or taxation systems. Over time, these groups acted like war lords, embedding themselves in local economies and sustaining cycles of violence. Instead of protecting civilians, they used their power to extract resources and enforce loyalty to coercion. By the mid-2000s, military pressure from the Ugandan army pushed Kony to relocate. Northeastern DRC, especially the Garamba National Park region, became a refuge, with its dense forests, porous borders, and an absence of effective government control. From this base, Kony's forces raided villages, massacred civilians, and abducted thousands, deepening the humanitarian crisis. The LRA's ability to cross into South Sudan and Central African Republic highlighted how instability in one country could spill into an entire region. In 2008, Operation Lightning Thunder, a joint military campaign by Uganda, the DRC, and South Sudan with the U.S. support, tried to eliminate the LRA but failed. Kony retaliated with massacres in Congolese villages, killing more than 800 people and displacing tens of thousands. These atrocities underscored the weakness of regional coordination and the enormous human costs of failed interventions. The story of Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army cannot be separated from the broader history of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Decades of colonial exploitation, authoritarianism, rebel insurgencies, and neglected governance created the perfect conditions for extremist groups to survive. Kony's use of religion as a tool of terror illustrates how spiritual rhetoric, when combined with political vacuum and social despair, can become a weapon of war. The LRA's presence in the DRC added another level of suffering to a population already devastated by militias, resource conflicts, and displacement. Today, Joseph Kony remains at large despite international warrants, a reminder how unaddressed instability in one corner can ripple outward, leaving scars on generations and perpetuating humanitarian crises across Central Africa.
Now we'll be moving on to some events that actually led to the modern-day influence of creating this group. Many people may wonder about the motivations of people behind the LRA. Well, one reason is that Joseph wanted to spread his religious ideologies, claiming to be a spiritual leader. He also wanted to establish a government based on the Ten Commandments. However, many people online argue that his religious beliefs and actions don't align and instead contradict his beliefs. Another reason is that Kony wanted to overthrow the Ugandan government and form a government of his own. Over time, the LRA began to engage in activities such as smuggling arms and ivory, operating more like a criminal gang than a traditional rebel group. Now, others wonder why there's a lack of attention on the scenario. With everything that's been happening because of the LRA, people usually expect the news to be blasting with updates and new information on the situation. But that isn't the case nowadays. Even though the Kony 2012 campaign brought temporary attention, consistent media coverage lacks, and the LRA is rarely spoken about today. Central Africa, which is where the LRA operates, has historically been less prioritized in global geopolitics. Plus, many news outlets decide to focus on seemingly bigger topics that will get more clicks and views, raising another point of how news outlets typically choose to brush over marginalized conflicts, like that of the LRA. Although crimes have subsided, they're still present, and what happens in the present doesn't account for everything that's happened in the past. Many survivors and human rights activists emphasize how important and detrimental the actions of the LRA truly were, pushing for accountability and more widespread media coverage on the topic. Another important question many people have is, why are big powers like China and the US mainly ignoring the situation? Big powers like China and the US are choosing to ignore the situation for a few reasons. Now, the US has done some work, sending advisors and passing a law to help fight for the LRA, but in their eyes, the LRA isn't their top priority compared to places such as the Middle East. China mostly focuses on a non-interference approach, and mostly focuses on business in Africa. They try not to get involved in situations like this. Plus, the LRA operates in several different countries, making it complicated for other countries to step in. Moving on to current and recent events in our current timeline regarding the LRC, there will be an absentia hearing for Joseph Kony held on September 9, 2025, according to AP News. In this hearing, International Criminal Court prosecutors will present evidence to back up charges of war against humanity on Kony. Plus, the hearing is expected to include testimonies, witnesses, and experts, who will all bring attention to the human suffering caused by the LRA. This event is huge since it's the first time that ICC has proceeded with this confirmation of charges without the accused being present. Plus, according to NC Herald, judges will hear 39 counts of crimes against humanity that Kony committed, such as murder, torture, and sexual slavery. It's nearly been 38 years since Kony joined the LRA, spanning from 1987 to 2025. Now, just in 2024, LRA officer Thomas Quoyello was tried in Uganda on charges including murder, kidnapping, and slavery. As a result of this, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Many people around the world are wondering whether Kony will be held accountable and face punishment in the upcoming hearing. However, this also raises a question about the challenges of watching criminals held captive. If Kony is convicted, it would be a huge moment for global human rights. As of 2022, the LRA is estimated to consist of about 1,000 members, with an extremely weak military. However, as of today, the LRA is thought to have minimized to a smaller number of members. Current events show us how past events can still impact our present day, and also remind us of the ongoing importance of justice.
As we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with something deeper than facts and figures, something more important than goals and ideals, the human cost of conflict. In the north of the Congo, families once gathered to celebrate Christmas, to smile and laugh around gifts and food with friends and family alike. But in December 2008, those celebrations turned into nightmares. The Lord's Resistance Army swept their villages, committing what the Human Rights Watch would later call the Christmas massacres. Over 800 civilians were killed, with children being abducted, never to be seen again. Survivors of the event can only describe the unimaginable horror: people burning alive, families torn apart, and entire communities being erased. These are not just statistics. These are not just the cost of conflict. These are people. Moms, dads, sons, sisters, aunts, people who had dreams, people who laughed, people who loved, all caught in a storm they did not create. Even with the DRC's soil holding golds and diamonds, there is no schools, no hospitals, and little to no futures being built on top of it. Instead, these resources have only ever fueled violence. Armed groups, including the Lord's Resistance Army, have exploited these materials, smuggling them across the borders while the local communities remain impoverished. And, as we all may ask, where is the action? For years, the international response was slow, fragmented, and oftentimes uncaring. Western powers of economic interest in the region looked away. Sadly, the suffering of civilians in a foreign land does not trend on social media. It did not dominate headlines, and yet, it continues quietly. Today, as Joseph Kony faces a hearing in the International Criminal Court, we are reminded that justice, however the delay, comes eventually. However, justice also includes healing. The thousands of children forced away from their families and dragged into war all face new traumas. Many adults must face a new trial, integrating into society. Many still struggle with integration into society today, haunted by the childhood they experience, the childhood that they never asked for, the childhood that was forced upon them. While their stories are often forgotten, they paint a whole picture of the lasting impact of the conflict. However, justice is not just about trials and tribulations. It is about recognition. It is about remembering those who were silenced. It is about making sure their stories are heard. So, if you are listening, I ask you, do not let this just be another episode. Share what you have learned. Make the issue known, because silence is what allowed this to happen, and awareness is the first step towards change. Thank you for joining us. Keep caring, keep remembering, and above all, keep pushing forward for a world where no child is forced to fight. This concludes this episode of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you so much for listening. For a transcript of this episode, head to Point of View tab on our website, northviewhighschoolmessenger.org, and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at NHS Point of View for updates and new episodes. We've been your hosts, Aiden, Zara, and Olivia, and this has been Point of View.